Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this live telephone town hall with Congressman Mike Levin. During this event, we will be taking questions from constituents like you. To ask the Congressman a question, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad. You can also get subscribed to our email newsletter by pressing star 6. Again, press star 3 to ask a question and star 6 to sign up to receive our newsletter updates. With that, I'll turn it over to Congressman Mike Levin. Welcome, Congressman. The floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you so much, Dirk, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our telephone town hall. When I was first elected in 2018, I made a commitment to hold monthly town halls to hear directly from you and to answer your questions. I've kept my word, and I'm proud that this is our 132nd town hall. I host both in-person and telephone town halls for all constituents who want to ask questions and hear about my work on behalf of our district. We're seeing record participation at the town halls, and I appreciate your engagement. Today, I hope to answer as many questions as possible and discuss current events that are impacting our district, state, and country. I also want to welcome our guest speaker, Ian Basson, the co-founder and executive director of Protect Democracy, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting our democratic institutions and defeating authoritarianism. To ask a question, press star 3 at any time. To subscribe to my e-newsletter, press star 6. Let's begin with where things stand on funding for the Department of Homeland Security, and specifically for ICE, which is Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Last week, the Department of Homeland Security shut down because Congress was unable to pass a bill to fund the agency for the rest of fiscal year 2026. Homeland Security is a big agency that includes ICE, Customs and Border Protection, TSA, FEMA, and the Coast Guard. Almost all of them are now impacted by the funding lapse. But the one entity that is insulated is ICE, who received an unprecedented amount of funding under the one big, I believe, not so beautiful bill that passed last year. Billions and billions of dollars continue to support ICE's operations, largely without guardrails. I voted against the Homeland Security bill because Congress cannot continue writing blank checks to any federal agency that fails to meet basic standards of accountability, transparency, or respect for constitutional rights. There are a few possible paths forward, and as a member of the House Appropriations Committee, I am eager to find a path forward. One option is another short-term funding bill to keep Homeland funded for several weeks or months until an agreement is made. Another option would be for Congress to pass a full-year funding bill to fully fund Homeland through the rest of fiscal 2026 at either the same funding levels as the previous year or at new funding levels. But if Congress can't come to agreement on either of those options, we'll remain at an impasse. I want to be very clear. If there are no reforms or guardrails placed on ICE in any of these bills, there should be no funding. I will keep voting against funding the Department of Homeland Security unless there are real reforms that are agreed upon. There are several things I'd like to see. Those include, number 1, no ICE agents at sensitive locations like schools, hospitals, churches, or certainly polling places. Particularly the threats of having ICE agents at polling stations are meant to intimidate voters, and we cannot allow that to happen. Number 2, no arrests without judicial warrants. If the government wants to enter your home, it needs a real warrant from a real judge, full stop. Number 3, there must be body cameras that are worn at all times and clear identification for all ICE agents. And there must be independent investigations when agents use excessive force or violate people's rights. These are pragmatic proposals with the support of a broad majority of Americans from across the political spectrum. And they're also standard practices for every other law enforcement agency in America. And I have spoken to many people in law enforcement that agree that all those things I just mentioned are completely reasonable and the least we should expect. But every one of these protections was rejected by Republican leadership. Not only that, but they even rejected, as part of the appropriations process, a proposal to not use any of the funding that ICE receives for the deportation or detainment of American citizens. They wouldn't even agree to that. I want to be very clear. The The overwhelming majority of law enforcement officers, certainly including our local police and sheriffs, serve our communities with professionalism and with integrity. They earn our trust every day by following clear rules, by respecting due process, and by accepting oversight. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for ICE under the direction of Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem. Multiple documented incidents have raised serious concerns about their conduct. We've seen repeated cases involving excessive force, mistaken detentions, and actions affecting U.S. citizens and lawful residents. At the same time, ICE continues to operate with fewer safeguards than virtually any other law enforcement agency. Again, my position is simple. Federal agencies must follow the law and operate transparently. Until meaningful safeguards are in place, I will not support funding that enables this agency to operate without accountability, oversight, or the protections afforded by the Constitution. To ask a question, press *3 at any time. To subscribe to my e-newsletter, press *6. Next, I'd like to discuss a significant development impacting our environment and our economy. Last week, the Environmental Protection Agency repealed a bedrock policy called the endangerment finding. That's a scientific finding saying that carbon pollution is dangerous, and it gives EPA the authority to protect the environment and to regulate that pollution. Now the Trump administration has wiped it out, and as a result, we're going to encounter more pollution, dirtier air, more respiratory illnesses, and potentially more deaths as a result. But we're also going to have higher energy bills, increased costs for everyday goods, and even more expensive home insurance rates. Because when climate-related events become more frequent and more severe, insurance companies don't eat the cost, they raise rates for consumers. EPA's action was awful, and the American people, I believe, should expect their leaders to protect them, not to protect just a handful of fossil fuel interests, at the same time endangering the health and homes and future of everyday Americans. We're going to fight this with everything we have in the courts and in Congress, and I'll keep you posted as this moves forward. As a reminder, to ask a question, press *3 at any time. To subscribe to my e-newsletter, press *6. Next, I want to discuss an issue that hundreds of you have brought to my attention, and that's the rise in energy costs and utility bills. In 2025, electricity prices rose an average of 13%, putting a strain on family budgets at a time when 80 million American households are struggling to pay their utility bills. Families are paying more to heat and cool their homes, more to keep the lights on, and more to just get through the month. And for millions of Americans already stretched thin, a higher utility bill is simply a bill they can't afford. Disastrously, throughout the past year, this administration's policies have also wiped out more than 165,000 clean energy jobs, and they've also canceled enough renewable energy projects to power 13 million homes. Unfortunately, we're falling behind when it comes to clean energy deployment, and that also means not only higher bills, but surrendering jobs, surrendering influence, economic opportunity, and ceding the stage to China and other countries. Around the world, countries that are deploying clean energy the fastest are gaining a decisive advantage. They're lowering costs, strengthening domestic manufacturing, and securing control over the energy supply chains that will shape the global economy for decades. Unfortunately, despite all of that, America won't remain competitive. We're going to be deliberately dismantled, our competitive position, by the Trump administration. But I do have some good news. In the coming weeks, I'm going to introduce a new comprehensive legislative package known as the Energy Bills Relief Act to lower energy costs by expanding access to clean energy. The package will be a proactive agenda to put affordability over profits, deploy clean energy projects across the country, and modernize the electric grid to deliver more cheap power to homes. I hope this legislation will kickstart a real conversation about how to create a more sustainable and affordable energy future, and I'll be sure to keep you updated as this bill is introduced. As a reminder, to ask a question, press *3 at any time, and to subscribe to my e-newsletter, press *6. Next, I want to update you on federal funding I've recently secured to tackle some important priorities for our district. That includes over $42 million for new community projects that'll make railroad and highway improvements, tackle homelessness, create safer streets, and more. This includes $26 million to improve the flood protection for Oceanside and surrounding areas by beginning the work to repair the San Luis Rey River levee system and remove sediment in the river channel. And boy, is this long overdue. For many decades, it's been overdue, and I'm very happy we were able to get this funding. I also secured an additional $100 million to address the removal of spent nuclear fuel across the country, including right in our district at San Onofre. These funds will be used to develop the infrastructure needed to safely transport and manage waste, work with communities to identify potential new storage and disposal sites, and support research into improved long-term management of spent nuclear fuel. At San Onofre alone, about 3.5 million pounds of waste is stored in dozens of canisters that must be relocated. I'm working hard to remove this waste as quickly and as safely as possible. Altogether, the funds I just mentioned build on over $1 billion that I've secured for our district since entering Congress. These investments are making positive differences in communities all throughout our district, and I look forward to fight for more federal resources in the years ahead. Now let me turn back to our special guest, Ian Bassin, the co-founder and executive director of Protect Democracy. Ian's a former associate White House counsel who spent his entire career defending the rule of law from the inside and the outside. After serving in government, he saw firsthand how fragile the democratic norms can be when leaders choose power over principle. But rather than step back, he stepped forward. He helped launch Protect Democracy to ensure that our courts, elections, oversight mechanisms, and constitutional checks and balances are strong enough to withstand abuse, no matter who's in office. And Protect Democracy has become one of the nation's leading nonpartisan organizations working to prevent authoritarianism and strengthen democratic guardrails. They litigate when executive power is abused. They advocate for reforms that protect free and fair elections. They defend the independence of inspectors general and career public servants. And they educate Americans, as Ian will in just a minute, about how democracy erodes not all at once, but gradually through the normalization of misconduct and the weakening of accountability. His work is so urgent because democracy does not fail in a single dramatic moment. It erodes when laws are ignored, when power concentrates unchecked, when political violence becomes common, and when truth itself becomes negotiable. And in Congress, I try to support that same mission. I've defended, for example, the constitutional power of the purse when the administration overreaches. I've supported transparency efforts like releasing the Epstein files. I've opposed unlawful tariffs. Of course, we saw that from the Supreme Court this morning, and executive actions that undermine Congress. And I've worked to prohibit members of Congress from trading stocks because accountability must start with us. So this is not partisan work. This is patriotic work. And Ian reminds us that institutions only endure when people of conscience defend them. I'm very grateful that he's here with us. And Ian, I'll now turn it over to you for your introductory remarks.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman, and I want to especially thank all of your constituents who are here today. I can't think of anything more fundamentally democratic in the way that our founders envisioned than citizens of this country participating in a town hall hosted by their local representative and executing the office of citizen, the most important office in the land. So as the Congressman mentioned, I had the privilege of serving in the White House counsel's office, where my job essentially consisted of making sure that high-level executive branch officials, including the president, the White House staff, and the leadership of our federal agencies, abided by the rules that make us a liberal democratic constitutional system. For example, it was part of my job to make sure that people in the White House did not call the Department of Justice and tell them who to investigate or who to prosecute, because our Department of Justice is supposed to make those decisions on the basis of an independent application of facts to law, not based on the political or partisan decision-making or preferences of those who happen to occupy the White House. After I served my time in the White House counsel's office, I watched as around the world, leaders were elected to power in countries like Venezuela, in countries like Hungary, in countries like Turkey, and once they were in power, began to dismantle democratic systems from within. And so in late 2016, I founded the organization Protect Democracy to prevent that from happening here in the United States. And so I want to explain a little bit about the moment we're living in globally and the moment we're living in here domestically in the United States. So historians of political history and political science typically identify three waves of democracy in the modern era. With the American Revolution and the French Revolution, democracy, which had been dormant for centuries around the world, revived in the modern era, though deeply imperfectly. That was considered the first wave of modern democracy, and it crashed out within several years, if not decades. After World War II, a second wave of democracy arose as the imperial colonial powers receded and countries that had been colonized became independent and initially democratic around the world. But then too many of those democracies collapsed into dictatorship and authoritarianism. That was the second wave of democracy. And then finally, in the last quarter of the 20th century, the third wave of democracy rose. When the dictatorships in Portugal and Spain collapsed in the mid-70s, democracy raced around the world, and you had the greatest amount of the global public living under democratic governments at any point in all of history, peaking with the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union in a moment that scholars considered perhaps the end of history, and perhaps for herever after, constitutional representative democratic government would be the hegemonic governing philosophy the world over. And unfortunately, in the mid-aughts, you started to see that third wave of democracy collapse. And for the last 18 or so years, democracy has been in retreat around the world as a new form of government, what the scholars refer to as hybrid or competitive authoritarianism, rose. That form of government saw leaders get elected to power and then seek to rig the system from within, to entrench themselves and to serve their own interests and their own power at the expense of the interests of the public. And there is a very consistent pattern to the way these competitive autocrats do this, whether they are coming from the left in places like Latin America and Central America, or whether they are coming from the right in places like Eastern Europe. You see the same autocratic playbook play out in all of these instances, and it includes essentially the same 7 steps. First, these autocrats politicize independent institutions in our government, like the Department of Justice and law enforcement, like the military, like our civil servant career bureaucrats who are supposed to make decisions independently of partisan interests, and they get politicized. Second, you see these autocratic governments spread misinformation and disinformation at the hands of the government. Third, you see them aggrandize power in the hands of the executive and undermine institutions that are supposed to serve as checking institutions like legislatures or courts or the free press or the private sector. Fourth, you see these autocrats quash dissent, as we've seen here with the FCC threaten late-night comedians if they say things that are not to the liking of the government in power. Fifth, you see these autocratic leaders and movements scapegoat vulnerable populations, whether it is immigrants, whether it is our LGBTQ brothers and sisters, whether it is people on the basis of race or religion or national origin. This has been the tyrant's favorite tool since antiquity, because if you can pit people against each other on the basis of these identity classifications, it just becomes easier to pick their pockets of money and power. Sixth, they stoke violence, as we saw here tragically on January 6th and in the streets of Minneapolis. And then finally, and this is the one I want to underscore right now, they corrupt elections. They allow elections to happen. Vladimir Putin holds elections in Russia, but those elections are not free and fair. The deck is stacked to keep the people in power in their seats, even at the expense of the will of the voters and the public. And I want to underscore here that as we enter a year of important elections around the country, the most fundamental bedrock principle of American constitutional government is that the first 3 words of the Constitution, we the people, determine who is ultimately sovereign. And it is up to the people, it is up to the voters to decide who they want to send to Washington on their behalf. And they need to have the free opportunity to do that, that eligible voters need to have an easy ability to cast ballots, and that the way those ballots are cast need to be counted fairly in accordance with the law, and the people who won the election need to be properly seated. And unfortunately, in recent years, we've seen efforts, including from the president, after he lost the presidency in 2020, to try to subvert that process. And so the important thing this year is that we make sure, as the congressman was saying, that we don't allow improper interference in our elections, such as through the deployment of ICE to intimidate voters around polling places, or other ways of trying to subvert or undermine the normal process by which we freely elect our representatives. And as the leader of Protect Democracy and part of an ecosystem of nonpartisan civil society groups, we are working every day to make sure that our elections, even in the face of incredible threats, go smoothly. And the role that I think all of us have to play here on this call is to remind people that no matter how many threats our elections have faced in recent years, they've been remarkably resilient. Our elections have overwhelmingly delivered the will of the people, whether it went one way or the other, and that has been honored. And that will happen again, but it is important for people to stand up for the integrity of elections and for people to participate in the process. And people can do that by volunteering to be poll workers. PowerThePolls.org is a great organization that helps people sign up to volunteer, to be nonpartisan poll workers, and to help your neighbors cast their ballots and play a really key role in our civic process. And we will, at ProtectDemocracy.org, be providing information throughout the year about how to understand what the rules are, where they're being threatened, and things that you can do to protect the process. And I'd be happy to answer questions about all of this work, but I fundamentally believe that in moments of challenge like this, as we've seen around the world, is where citizens reassert their sovereignty and take control back over our country and our destiny and our democracy. And if you're on this call right now, you are doing the most vital thing you can do in a democracy, which is participate. And I'm so grateful for that, and to the congressman for allowing me to share some of this here.
Well, Ian, thank you so much for that tremendous overview of the work that you're doing. And I hope before we conclude, we can make sure to get the URL for your organization and how people can get directly involved. And I'm proud to report that we have over 7,900 attendees on this call right now, which is pretty awesome. So I hope everybody sticks around. We'll get to as many of these questions as we can. And Dirk, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. As a quick reminder, if you do have a question on your mind you'd like to ask live on this call, please press star 3 on your telephone keypad, and also take a moment to press star 6 to get signed up to receive the Congressman's very informative newsletter updates. Now, to the phones we go. We've got Richard in Solana Beach. Richard, you're live with Congressman Levin.
I know a lot.
Hello, Richard.
Hi.
You're live on the call, sir. Go right ahead with your question.
Congressman Levin, I'm curious what you think the ramifications of the Supreme Court's finding that tariffs have been unlawfully imposed by Trump, and how that will affect items in the future in the economy.
Well, thank you for the question, Richard. I can tell you that I was pleased to see the majority 6-3, and particularly given the conservative bent of the court. I skimmed through the opinion, and I will read it in more detail in the coming days, probably this evening. But long story short is I have been against the tariff regime, the entire Liberation Day, from the beginning for a couple reasons. Number one is because Congress was not consulted as required by law, particularly under IEEPA, which was the law that the administration used as justification to proceed with the reciprocal tariffs. And the second is that I just thought it was bad economic policy, because ultimately, if you remember what Trump was saying when he was campaigning last year, he talked a lot about how we were getting ripped off by countries all over the world and how he was going to restore our trade deficit. Well, the tariffs haven't done that. The trade deficit just came out, was reported yesterday. It's $901 billion. It's about where it was at the highest points in recent years. So it really hasn't worked as Trump said it was going to work. Number two, the tariffs, we have collected revenue. The Treasury has collected revenue, I think around $130 billion from the IEEPA tariffs, but it's been collected from the pocketbooks of Americans. And by that I mean either American taxpayers, American consumers who have ultimately bore the expense, or by our small businesses and our other businesses that have just increased. They've either increased the prices or they have eaten the costs, to their bottom line, or in many cases it's meant they've had to lay off staff. In other cases, it's meant that they haven't been able to make the investments that they wanted to, whether in acquisitions or in growth. In all cases, it's been bad for our economy. So I'm very pleased that the Supreme Court put the brakes on. Congress is the only one that gets to determine policies like this. That's just what the law says. It's clear as day. And as far as the ramification, it gives me hope that there are a number of other cases out there. I'm on amicus briefs in many of them where the administration has clearly overstepped core checks and balances under Article 1, for example, the power of the purse, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 7, that says Congress determines appropriations, not the president. So this gives me hope that the Supreme Court will rule in favor of Congress and really of other areas where checks and balances are being infringed. So my hope is that it's just the beginning, but we'll find out. We'll see what happens, and I look forward to another bill that we're going to be introducing that will require all of that $130 billion, which was collected through those IEEPA tariffs, which have now been declared illegal, all of it to be returned to those small businesses and to the American consumer, because it never should have happened in the first place. Thanks very much for the question.
So our next caller is David from Cardiff by the Sea. David, you are live on the call. What's on your mind? Hello, David.
I was speaking to a friend of mine, and we were going over a number of things that are of concern, and they brought up something that I wasn't aware of. It's called the SAVE Act. I don't know what that is, and I was wondering if you could explain a little bit to me. She seemed to imply that it was going to tighten up voter registrations and be very restrictive for us to do voting.
Well, that's good summary, David. And basically, it's a very partisan Republican bill that would require anybody registering to vote in a federal election to provide a form of proof of citizenship. And what that would mean is very specific documents like a passport, where many millions of Americans do not have a passport. A birth certificate could also be, a naturalization certificate. So you'd have to have one of those types of proof of citizenship. And in 2002, President George W. Bush actually signed into law kind of the current standards, which don't require physical citizenship documents, but would require, using the federal voter registration process or online voter registration process. We already, a lot of people are already using the driver's license as it is, or the birth certificate as it is, or the passport. But the reality is around 20 million Americans 20 million U.S. citizens would get left out if that were the law. And, that's about 10% of voting age people who are, again, these are voting age U.S. citizens that don't have access to one of those forms of citizenship. And it would particularly impact married women. And if you think about it, you've got tens of millions of women who have legal names that differ from their birth certificate. So without any additional documentation, they might not be able to register to vote. And, we already have motor voter registration through the DMV. This has been standard practice for decades. And we already know, and it has to be, bolded, underlined, italicized again and again and again, non-citizen voting is already illegal. It is already illegal. And it's already incredibly rare. And it's already a serious felony for non-citizens to vote. And study after study, audit after audit, from any credible organization that I've ever seen has said there are virtually no cases of non-citizen voting. It is literally statistically insignificant. So the problem with this is, of course, it shifts the burden from the government verification that exists today through records checks, through other means that are working, to individual citizens. And by shifting that burden, by forcing those citizens to produce documentation, it really will not do what it's intended to do. They claim prevent fraud, but instead, the far greater effect will be to prevent eligible citizens from voting. So it's a barrier to lawful participation that really is a solution looking for a problem. This is already super rare, and it's already very illegal. And I hope that is a decent explanation. Thanks for the question.
It is fantastic to see so many people that have connected into this live telephone town hall with your Congressman Mike Levin. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please press *3 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. And don't forget to also press *6 to get signed up to receive the Congressman's very informative newsletter updates. And we're heading out to Oceanside now. We've got Barbara joining us. Hi, Barbara. You're live with Congressman Levin. What is your question?
Well, first, I'd like to thank Mike and Ian for all they're doing. I'm very concerned about our democracy. Very, very concerned. And it's shoved in our face every day when we hear more about the destruction of the White House as well. I'd like to know if we can get an accounting of that down to the detail of who these people are that are contributing and making sure that the taxpayers aren't paying for this destruction. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. Ian, do you want to speak at all about what the president's doing with regard to the ballroom or any of the other unusual and very, very bad things that are happening?
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. And, when I was in the White House counsel's office, I used to go to every office throughout the White House and federal agencies, and I used to tell everybody, be allergic to free stuff. Now, there's a whole bunch of relatively complicated federal ethics rules in statute. There's an Office of Government Ethics that implements the federal ethics regime. And I would brief people on all those technicalities. But I think all of us on the call can understand a simple concept, which is if people give you something for free, you feel a human instinct to reciprocate. In fact, there was a study conducted where a psychologist invited subjects into a laboratory to look at artwork and rate the artwork. But the study involved a lab assistant in the middle of the study going into half the subjects and giving them a free Coca-Cola. The other half the subjects never got it. And when the subjects finished reviewing the artwork, the lab assistant asked all of them to purchase raffle tickets. And what do you think happened? The people who'd received the free Coca-Cola purchased many more raffle tickets than the people who hadn't, because as human beings, we're inclined to reciprocate. And so the federal ethics laws are based on that insight. And I used to tell people in the White House, if you're meeting with someone who has business before the White House, don't even accept a free can of soda from them, because it will corrupt your decision-making, not because you're a nefarious person, but because that is human psychology. And even if there were companies that came to the White House and offered to build things in the White House. So when we got to the White House, I worked for President Obama in 2009. At the time, there were several corporations. There was all sorts of new technology coming out, and they wanted to come in and install all sorts of new technologies in the White House. And we said no, because it would naturally make us more inclined to do a favor for that company. And that's not the way the government should work. And right now, we've got both of those problems happening at incredible scale. So as Barbara notes, we have all of these companies with business before the government that are donating millions of dollars to fund the White House ballroom, the new White House ballroom. And then on top of it, there are reports, the Wall Street Journal had a report 2 weeks ago, that royals of the United Arab Emirates made a deal to invest $500 million in the president's family's cryptocurrency company, World Liberty Financial, days before the president was inaugurated, with almost $200 million of those dollars going directly to the president's family and to his envoy brokering diplomacy in the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. I told people not to accept a free can of soda. And now we've got a president who's taking in hundreds of millions of dollars in financial interest to his family from foreign leaders. So we have a serious problem right now in this country with the corruption of the government, the corruption of the current administration, the corruption of the president's interests at scales, frankly, we haven't seen in the history of this country. Probably the most famous presidential corruption scandal is the Teapot Dome scandal, which involved about $400,000 in bribes, or what would shake out to about $5 million in inflation-adjusted dollars today. And we're looking at gifts being given to the president's interests in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So, Barbara, I think you're right to be concerned about making sure that if taxpayer funds are being spent on some renovation of the White House, that's done appropriately through the congressional appropriations process. But I hear in your question also, I think rightly, a concern, which is, what is the president offering in exchange to all of these interests, be they giving money to the government or be they giving money to his private interests as reciprocity for those gifts? And that's a serious concern for the integrity of our government, and why I'm grateful we have members of Congress who are concerned about these things, like Representative Levin, making sure that we are doing everything that we can, given the fact that right now Representative Levin is in the minority, to create accountability for this. And hopefully at some point, if Representative Levin is in a position to be in the majority, to make sure that there's accountability for this as well.
That sounds good to me, Ian.
All right, Congressman, moving on. We've got Joseph in San Juan Capistrano joining us now. Joseph, you are live on the call. What is your question?
Hi, how are you guys doing this evening? My question is, after it's concerning the current presidency, after the first Trump presidency, I got an idea that, we kind of learned where I feel our Constitution needed a few more pillars to shore it up, and that didn't happen. And what's happening now is the partisanship in the government is so bad. I mean, we've got an EPA person running the EPA who's pro-oil. I mean, if ever there was an example of an oxymoron, we have such partisanship running the DOJ. How are we going to change this? How are we going to stop this from happening in the future? And I'm not just talking about a shift to, now a Democrat is in charge, so everything will be okay. No, because a Democrat may go just as crazy. So how are we going to make it to where these positions are as partisan as possible? What can we do?
That's extremely well said, Joseph, and I'm going to ask Ian to weigh in a second. But I will tell you that, for as long as I have been paying attention, and I know many, many decades, we've been relying on civil servants, people who serve under presidents of both parties in a lot of cases. And, their job is to serve the Constitution, to serve the people, and to do their jobs, with competence and effectiveness. And we've seen a really troubling shift. And I think it's most egregious in the Trump administration, but it didn't necessarily start there, where you have really loyalty tests that replace qualifications. And this was a big part of Project 2025, where people that were interested in working in a future Trump 2.0 administration were basically given a survey where they were asked such questions as, who do you look up to? What politicians do you look up to? And if the answer wasn't Donald J. Trump, boy, then you were not loyal enough to get a gig. You had to be a total political loyalist, a total MAGA loyalist. Then, of course, what they did is they removed the inspectors general. Those are the people that, they talked about efficiency and going after waste, fraud, and abuse with DOJ, if you remember. But the IGs are the ones who actually do that work, who go after the waste, fraud, and abuse. And then they have put enormous pressure across the government on these career professionals who have a responsibility and a loyalty, again, not to any one president, but to tell the truth and to do their jobs. So it's unbelievably dangerous. It shouldn't be a partisan thing. It ought to be something everybody can agree on. And what I'm doing in Congress, and I want to turn to Ian because I know he's doing a lot of work here, protections for the inspectors general, defending the independence of civil servants, and, making sure that federal workers can do their jobs without being, subject to constant political interference. So we need a lot more talented people in government. They have made horrible cuts under Russ Vought, the Office of Management and Budget Director, who, by the way, was one of the key architects of Project 2025. And we need our civil servants to make decisions based on the law and based on the facts and based on what's in the best interest of the nation, not of a political party or a president. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ian to get his thoughts. I'm sure you got plenty.
Indeed, I do, and I appreciate, Joseph, the question. And, the sad thing is we had largely solved this problem as a country 100 years ago. So prior to the turn of the 20th century, we had what was known as the spoils system in this country, where any president who got elected essentially got to hire all of the workers in the federal workforce based on who were their partisan supporters. And every time there was a new president in office, they would put their loyalists into all of the different positions of presidential patronage. And this created two problems. One, there was a lack of consistency of expertise as modernity got more complicated and you wanted people who understood how to predict when hurricanes were coming to develop that expertise and stay in government, to apply it over time and not have to train new people every time there's a new administration on how to predict hurricanes, because predicting hurricanes is not a partisan activity. And the second problem was that when presidents were basically using these jobs as rewards for people who supported them in campaigns, they were putting people into these offices who weren't necessarily qualified with expertise to do these jobs, but their mere qualification was political support for the president. And when that's your qualification, you don't have the best people predicting when we might have earthquakes or tsunamis in California. And so prior to the turn of the 20th century, Congress passed reforms, the Pendleton Act, that created the nonpartisan civil service and essentially allowed the president to appoint just the top layer of federal bureaucracy, which were basically the leaders who were going to implement the policy agenda that the president was elected to enact. But all of the staff that worked in all of these agencies and that did the work of predicting hurricanes and tornadoes or making sure that Social Security payments went out stayed from administration to administration so that they were hired for their expertise, and we retained their expertise on behalf of the taxpayers. And as Joseph noted, President Trump is now trying to essentially gut that system. He signed an executive order recently that would reclassify a whole swath of those civil servants as not nonpartisan experts, but political apparatchiks. And I'm proud to say that we at Protect Democracy are suing over that because the law is clear that the Congress has made a decision that those positions should be beyond the reach of the president to fire, precisely because we want the best people in those jobs who are experts at the technicalities of doing them and delivering for the American people in ways that really shouldn't matter whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whether you support this president or that one or whether you believe or not that the 2020 election was stolen. So we're litigating that case. We're hopeful that we'll be able to maintain the law as it was passed more than 100 years ago because, Joseph, we have the solution. We just got to make sure that it gets enforced.
So I'd like to take a quick detour from the live Q&A and ask everybody that's connected into this call to use your telephone to respond to this question. What is your biggest concern right now? Is it the cost of health care? Press 1. Rising grocery and utility bills? Press 2. Immigration and ICE? Press 3. State of our democracy? Press 4. So again, what is your biggest concern right now? The cost of health care? Press 1. Rising grocery and utility bills? Press 2. Immigration and ICE? Press 3. The state of our democracy? Press 4. See, a number of people are keying in their response. Thank you very much for your participation. And don't forget, press star 3 if you've got a question and star 6 to get signed up to receive the Congressman's very informative newsletter updates. Promise, back into the Q&A. We got Theodore from San Clemente on the line with us. Theodore, welcome to the call. Thanks for your patience. What is your question?
Thank you. I'm just wondering if the congressman has any plans to bring more funding to South Orange County for erosion and sand replenishment and stabilizing the railway.
Absolutely. Yes, Theodore. So that's been a top priority for me for now 8 years. And I'll tell you that our whole district has consistent need for what I call the 3 S's: sand, stabilization, and stakeholder engagement. So we have, of course, the busiest rail corridor anywhere other than in the northeastern United States. The low sand corridor connects LA and San Diego, runs right through our district, and the tracks, whether it's in San Clemente or in Del Mar, in many cases, they're running just feet away from the ocean, and we see erosion, we see landslides that threaten those tracks year after year after year, and the rail service shuts down. And it happens, way too often, and every time it happens, there's a big economic impact as a result. So on top of the fact that millions of people rely on the corridor to get from LA to San Diego, commuters, tourists, people that work in the region, when the rail line shuts down, the average commute in our district round trip's about an hour. And so when the rail line shuts down, it just makes things worse. People are forced onto the roads and the freeways. You got visitors that aren't able to get around, and local businesses are impacted. So I have worked really, really hard on this straight through, and we've been able to secure $100 million for our partnership with Orange County Transit to make sure that we improve the hot spots, where they have 4 hot spots in South OC where the erosion is worst. And, trying to get the coastal resilience projects to move forward and the stabilization projects to move forward, that's gone really well. And I give great credit to our friends at OCTA, great credit to our friends at the county as well. They're great partners in all this. And then we've secured many tens of millions more for sand replenishment and other bluff projects in Encinitas, Solana Beach, and Del Mar. And we're working on plenty more in Oceanside as well, and really all of our district. So sand replenishment is a very effective tool because it protects the bluffs, it protects the rail line, it protects our beaches, and ensures we have public access, and ultimately the vitality of our coastal economy. I was really honored that our sand replenishment project that we funded through both the bipartisan infrastructure law and through annual appropriations, we got an award. I was actually at the Encinitas City Hall this past week receiving an award as one of the 4 best Army Corps projects throughout the United States. So very, very pleased. The other thing that I think is so important, it's not a one-time fix. We got all this money, but it's not a one-time fix. Just as important as the appropriation of funds was the 50-year authorization that we secured, meaning every 5 to 10 years, depending on the area, we're going to be authorized to go and get more sand. And on top of that, I sit on the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee that oversees the funding for the Army Corps of Engineers. So I'm going to fight every 5 to 10 years as necessary to get more money for more sand and more stabilization projects on an ongoing basis. Eventually, there are parts of the rail line, of course, in Del Mar, where they may need to relocate. Sandag has taken that up. I'm engaged with them. I'm waiting for the community to achieve consensus. In the meantime, funding the planning, the engineering, the design to ensure that when we are ready, when the community has agreed upon a construction route, that we're there with the federal funds to support whatever the community agrees so that we can ensure this corridor keeps running safely for the next 100 years. So I really, really appreciate the question. It's an honor to get to help with this work.
All right, our next caller, we've got Gary in Carlsbad. Gary, you're live with Congressman Levin. What's on your mind?
Hey, respectfully, there are 4,000 children, innocent children held in Miller Trump's concentration camps. There's 70,000 innocent people in these concentration camps. Heroic words by Representative Dexter to get out one family, Representative Garcia to get little Liam out, Representative Craig's going into Whipple as much as she can. Representative Ramirez is on a tear trying to rip apart ICE. 80% of us want ICE destroyed, not to take down their scarves, not body cams. They don't care if they're on camera. And most of you in Congress don't seem to get it. Man, you can't reform secret police, and that's what you're trying to do. You have got to step up and do what these brave representatives are doing. Get children out, get innocent people out, stop farting around. Come on, man, fight. We want you to fight.
Gary, respectfully, I was there yesterday, visiting Otay Mesa, visiting the Schwartz building in the basement. I go once a month. I've gone every month this year. I've been visiting ICE and Border Patrol facilities prior to this year at least once a quarter. I am pushing back privately. I am pushing back publicly. And yesterday I brought all of our North County mayors to meet with the regional ICE director, not because we agree with him. I am personally disgusted by many of the things that are occurring, as are you. But that at least to try to communicate, to understand what is going on in our cities, what is going on in our communities. I'm going to keep regularly conducting oversight. Yesterday I met with a constituent, a father of a constituent that had reached out to us. This person was in their 60s. He had been in the country for 25 years. He had had no interaction with either the criminal or the civil justice system, and he was rounded up and summarily taken to the basement in the Schwartz building and then to Otay, where he's been since February 2nd. We're going to do everything we can to get people who are peaceful, people who are nonviolent, people who are contributing positively to our society and our economy, to get them out and to make sure that we give them a path to stay. And we also are going to do everything we can to fight like hell for transparency, for accountability. I will continue to do everything I can to advocate with our local leaders, our local communities, to make sure that, as you said, Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem are held to account. Because when it's a quota that is driving the actions of ICE, rather than going after the truly violent threats to our national security, to our public safety, which, oh, by the way, was the original concept of ICE post 9/11, to go after the legitimate national security threats, legitimate public safety threats, not to go after people who are contributing to our economy, not to rip families apart, not to have people who have been here for 20, 30 years ripped away from their families. That is BS. My own family would not be here. My own grandfather would never have come had those policies been in place when my grandpa decided to make the move from Mexico to the United States when he was 15 years old. And so long as we are forgetting what made America great in the first place, which is you could come from anywhere in the world and you could make it in this country, where you could make it, you could start a business, you could get educated. If that is forgotten, then so is the American story, and so is the legacy that have allowed families like mine, and I assume yours, to thrive and prosper. So I will continue to speak out against abuses wherever they occur. I will continue pushing for reform. I'll continue to oppose policies that undermine due process, that separate families, that target people who pose no threat to public safety or national security. And I will also at the same time support bipartisan immigration reform. I will continue to advocate for something called the Dignity Act, which would fix our broken immigration system, fix our broken asylum system, provide a lawful path. We have to keep at it. The only real solution to this is comprehensive reform, not political theater, from anybody. And we also have to make sure, as an appropriator, that I am not giving a blank check to a reckless and rogue agency without reform and without accountability. We control funding in the House, specifically on the Appropriations Committee. We have a duty to ensure that taxpayer dollars are used lawfully and are used effectively. And the last thing I will say that you don't hear about is that our office does a damn good job of helping constituents on a daily basis, working really hard to help them navigate the immigration system, help to resolve the cases that are held up in the courts, to ensure fair treatment, and to make sure that these agencies are following the law. And I give tremendous credit to my team who work really, really hard at this. So I absolutely support a secure border. I absolutely support going after people who are a legitimate threat to our national security, but it must be done lawfully, it must be done transparently, it must be done constitutionally, and it's got to be done consistent with our values, and I am fighting every day for that in Congress. Thank you.
So, Congressman, looking at the clock, we need to wrap up this call, but I want to make sure that we have time for some closing remarks, so I'll hand it back to you, sir.
Well, I want to thank Ian for joining us and for his outstanding work, and I'd actually like to take just a minute, Ian, if you would like to tell our listeners, and again, there were 7,963 at last count, how they can learn more about your organization and your work. Can you please share that information?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, you can visit us at protectdemocracy.org, and there you can sign up to receive our newsletter, ifyoucankeepit.org, and we'll keep you informed of opportunities where you can do more in exercising your office of citizen to protect our democracy, which I just want to say, Congressman, we are going to do in this generation to hand a stronger democracy to the next one. I am confident of it, and thank you for letting me join your call.
Well, I am grateful to you for the work you do every single day, Ian, and I look forward to working with you for many years to come. And with that, we are out of time. I think that'll have to be our last question for the day, and I appreciate everybody's questions. I'm going to thank you also for subscribing to our newsletter and for following us on social media. We've got all sorts of social media accounts, everything from, my God, X, Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Substack, YouTube, Facebook. I can't even keep track of them all, but I'm at Rep. Mike Levin, REPMIKELEVIN, at all those, and then on BlueSky at levin.house.gov. We are also able to help with all sorts of different issues that you may have, that you or your family might be having with any federal agency, including the VA, Social Security, the IRS. And in order to get in touch with us, you can either visit our website, levin.house.gov, or you can call our office, 760-599-5000, if we can be of assistance. I'll also mention on our website at levin.house.gov, we have an interactive map of all of our cities in the 49th Congressional District, where you can see exactly what federal funds we have been able to secure, how much, what projects. I'm very proud that it's now over $1.1 billion and counting, and I hope everybody checks that out at levin.house.gov. So until next time, thank you all for joining us. I hope everybody has a great and safe weekend. Take care.
It's worth noting, if you'd like to sign up for the Congressman's email newsletter, at this point in our call, simply stay on the line and leave us your name and email address after the tone. Thank you for sharing your time with us today. We hope you stay healthy and safe and have a great evening and a wonderful weekend. This concludes our call. Goodbye.